Can a show still claim authenticity when its teenagers look like adults who have already lived several lives? Euphoria built its reputation on raw honesty, emotional realism, and cultural relevance. But as its cast approaches 30, the illusion at the heart of the series is becoming harder to ignore. This is CurlyCurl Pop Culture Explained. Subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis of film, television, and the cultural conversations shaping what we watch. By 2026, Euphoria occupies an unusual space in television culture. It remains one of HBO's most visually striking and emotionally ambitious series, yet it is increasingly defined by a contradiction that the show itself seems unwilling to acknowledge. The central cast, Zendaya, Sydney Sweeney, and Jacob Elordi, are now 28 and 29 years old, continuing to portray high school students. What once felt like a stylized exaggeration now registers as a visible disconnect, one that complicates the show's claims to realism and emotional authenticity. The issue is not that audiences are suddenly discovering that adult actors play teenage roles. Hollywood has relied on this practice for decades. The difference is that Euphoria insists on being taken seriously as a grounded depiction of adolescence. Its aesthetic may be heightened, but its subject matter, addiction, sexual trauma, mental illness, and identity formation, is presented as raw and unfiltered. The show asks viewers to engage with teenage vulnerability as something urgent and real. That demand places pressure on every element of the production, including casting, to maintain credibility. In its earliest episodes, the age gap was easier to overlook. The cast, while older than their characters, still carried the physical ambiguity that allows adults in their early 20s to plausibly pass as teenagers under stylized lighting and costume design. Over time, that ambiguity has faded. Facial features have sharpened, bodies have matured, and the performers now project a confidence that reads less like adolescence and more like adulthood. The camera no longer disguises this. Instead, it unintentionally emphasizes it. This visual shift alters how the narrative is received. Teenagers are compelling protagonists largely because of their incompleteness. Their mistakes are contextualized by inexperience, their excesses by immaturity, their volatility by developmental uncertainty. When those same behaviors are embodied by actors who appear fully grown, the audience's interpretation changes. Actions meant to signal confusion or vulnerability can instead read as irresponsibility or self-destruction. The emotional framing of the story subtly but decisively shifts. The industry rationale for casting adult actors is well established. Labor laws limit the hours minors can work. Content restrictions make it ethically and legally fraught to ask teenagers to perform scenes involving sex, drug use, or extreme psychological distress. Adult actors offer reliability, endurance, and the ability to navigate demanding material without crossing ethical lines. For a series like Euphoria, which thrives on long shooting days and intense performances, these factors are not trivial. Yet Euphoria represents an extreme application of this logic. Rather than allowing its characters to age alongside its actors or adjusting the narrative framework to reflect the passage of time, the show keeps its characters frozen in high school. The result is a prolonged illusion that becomes harder to sustain with each passing year. What began as a practical compromise increasingly functions as a narrative constraint. There's also a broader cultural implication to consider. Euphoria is not a fantasy-driven teen show in the tradition of earlier network dramas. It presents itself as a reflection of contemporary adolescence, shaping how audiences understand what teenage life looks and feels like. When adult bodies repeatedly stand in for teenage ones, it reinforces a distorted visual standard of youth, one that conflates adolescence with fully matured, sexualized adulthood. While this practice is often defended as a safeguard for minors, it raises questions about the messages being normalized in the process. The discomfort surrounding Euphoria's casting is not about the talent of its actors, nor is it a moral indictment of the show's intentions. It is about coherence. The series positions itself as an unflinching portrait of youth, yet increasingly relies on performers whose age undermines that premise. The contradiction does not invalidate the show's artistic achievements, but it does complicate them. At some point, the necessity that justified the casting choice begins to compete with the story itself. When viewers become more aware of the illusion than the emotions it is meant to convey, the illusion has lost its power. In Euphoria's case, the question is no longer whether adults should play teenagers, a debate Hollywood settled long ago, but whether a show so invested in realism can continue to ask its audience to ignore what is plainly visible. The paradox of Euphoria is that its ambition has outpaced its framework. It wants to capture the fragility of adolescence while refusing to let its characters grow beyond it. As the cast approaches their 30s, the tension between those goals becomes impossible to ignore. What remains to be seen is whether the series will adapt, conclude, or continue asking viewers to suspend disbelief in ways that feel increasingly untenable.